Hey there, folks, and welcome back to the final Friday Night Spotlight brought to you by Jones Ford Buick GMC, your hometown dealer for more than 50 years. As I mentioned, this is our final episode of the season. We are wrapping everything up because, unfortunately for us, our two playoff teams last week in Apache Junction and Poston Butte did not make it out of the first round. And real quickly, before we begin wrapping everything up, we're going to give you guys a recap of both of those games. David, you were at the AJ game. What did you see?
Yeah, it was kind of tough going for towards the end of it. Apache Junction came out there and played their usual style, relying on guys like Gavin Lamangelo and Isaiah Savoy at running back and quarterback respectively. But the big issue was their number one wide receiver Garrett Garcia was not cleared to play in the game. He was not there. He suffered a concussion in their final game of the year, so he was not able to play in that. Played a little bit of a huge impact on them where they weren't able to kind of use their regular receiving attack as usual, but a lot of the guys did step up when they could. Like guys like Junior Ben Valenzuela did really well in that new role of kind of being the number one receiver. But Gavin basically put the team on his back. He did everything he could. They were up by 14 to start the game and were leading handily, but then things just kind of got away a little bit. And I think a common theme with some of these teams that were in the playoffs was that stopping the run was difficult, and the exact same thing happened with Apache Junction. It was tough for them to kind of stop a very stout run game from Prescott and just not able to kind of get anything going. And they were going back and forth for a lot in that second half, but just the steam ran out for them, unfortunately. And it's really unfortunate just to see them kind of fall victim to that first round game again, where they just weren't able to get it done. And it's going to be a turning point for Apache Junction going forward. Gavin Lamonto is going to be a senior. Same thing with Garrett Garcia. They're both graduating and getting out of here. So for me, what I see in the future is they have to key in on Isaiah Savoy. He has to be the guy that carries this team going forward in his senior year. It'll be his last year with the Prospectors, and if they have any hope of kind of finally getting over that first round hump, they're going to have to recruit well, find the guys that can fill those holes that are going to be left by the seniors, and have Isaiah Savoy be the guy for them.
All right, now I was at the Poston Butte game, and as David mentioned, slowing down the run was virtually impossible for Poston Butte, unfortunately. Last week, I raved about their defense. They let me down a little bit. You could kind of tell that they were at a disadvantage here. I mentioned it. Injuries had plagued the Broncos all season long, and this is where it showed. They had the younger guys stepping up, and they were overpowered. The physicality wasn't there, and just simply Lake Havasu's running back Isaac Stopsky was unstoppable. 6 touchdowns, over 300 rushing yards. I mean, any team going up against Lake Havasu in the future has their work cut out for them. And offensively, Poston Butte had struggled the previous weeks, but things were working well for them. For majority of the first half, it was a pretty close game, but by the second half, the defense, as I mentioned, inexperience and fatigue just started to play a factor. And unfortunately for the Broncos, their season ended. Contrary to Apache Junction's problems, Poston Butte is a relatively young team in some of these key positions. As I mentioned, the defense. Hey, these guys got that playoff experience. I've always mentioned their tough region, so this is just helping them out in the long run. At the running back position, Poston Butte is just known for having, somebody coming up through the ranks, so I don't expect anything different from them next year. So, hey, we're probably going to see these Broncos in the playoffs, for a couple of the upcoming year. Overall, David, what are your takeaways from this season?
I think there were just a lot of surprises that we saw. We didn't really see coming, and there are a lot of surprising teams that we, expected for them to be okay, but not to perform as well as they did. And the first team that comes to mind for me is Combs. I think Combs put together a really solid season, and this was kind of the year for them to put it all together with their seniors like Tanner Hale and Hunter Clare, the quarterback and wide receiver duo, being seniors and moving on. I think this was the year to do it. They were literally a play away from going to the playoffs for the first time in, I think, over about 5-6 years, and it just unfortunately didn't come up. If we got to be honest here, it was a horrible call by the ref. It was clearly a pass interference play, just wasn't able to get it done. So it's unfortunate that Combs had to end their season like that, but I think if they're able, like you said, to find those right teams or right guys that are coming up through the ranks, they'll be okay. And then other teams in our 3A regions like Florence and Santan Foothills. Florence was undefeated for a majority of the here, and we did not expect that whatsoever. This team is very solid and finally had some stability under coaching, and the same thing going for Santan Foothills. They found some stability at coaching with their head coach, and these teams are still relatively young. They're going to have a lot of guys coming back and being able to kind of perform, and now they have to be on the radar. Teams are going to have to look at them differently and look at them as serious contenders to make the playoffs, but also win region titles. And I think these teams are definitely going to be someone that we look for in the future. Going down to 2A, Santa Cruz ended up having a really solid year. This team was coming into the year with a new head coach, a lot of seniors that were established with the team, not there anymore, and this team was able to put together a solid year. They rattled 5 or 6 straight wins after losing their first 3. It came down to a final game between a Sequoia Pathway and just weren't able to do it. But this team is young, and a lot of these teams that we have are very young. So there's a lot of talent still in Pinal County, and I'm expecting to see a lot more going into next year and what these teams can do.
All right, now looking at our other teams, one of the teams, we have to talk about when talking about stability is Maricopa. They got to find some stability in their head coaches. It's been kind of a coaching carousel prior to what it was at Santan Foothills. If they can find one guy to stick it through and lay that foundation down that guys can buy into, Maricopa could be a force because they do have the athletes. Moving down to 5A in Casa Grande Union, we expected this. We expected that it would be a struggle moving up a conference and then the region they were in and the teams they were competing against. Some of these games were winnable for them. However, they were undisciplined at times. And yes, they were also young, so that youth and inexperience also showed. But knowing head coach Mark Luna and just the connection that he's been able to build with these athletes since they were little, the CG Union team is eventually going to get everything put together. And they're going to be a force in 5A. And then just wrapping things up, we got to talk about our other Casa Grande team in Vista Grande, who was also a surprise for us. Second-year head coach John Roberts has finally brought the Spartans up to par with, some of the other teams at the 4A level. He's mentioned it before, they're not bottom of the barrel anymore. And that showed for them because when they had that 6-game program record, win streak, and looking at the future like other teams, Vista Grande has a lot of guys coming back. They have those core players. So next year is kind of their year to put everything together and see, hey, can they make playoffs? The Spartans have only been to the playoffs 1 year in 2015, but they're on the right direction, and next year is going to be time for them to take that next step. David, overall, is there anything else you want to add?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned, obviously, our 2 Casa Grande schools because, these guys are definitely on the rise. And for Casa Grande Union, I think this year just kind of proved, despite the record, that Mark Luna is the guy going forward. Mark Luna has, like you said, built solid chemistry with both his coaching staff and his players. He knows these kids so well, and I think Mark Luna is definitely going to be a guy that we look to and saying, that's the guy that's established the Casa Grande Union Cougars at 5A, and I think we're going to be looking forward to when that day comes. It could be next year, it could be a couple more years down the line, but they're just going to keep improving and getting better and better, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do, and it's going to be a good season. We start next year. We have a lot of teams that are still on the rise, and like we talked about, there's still a lot of youth coming up, and there's going to be some teams that we look for, and we're thinking that they could be serious title contenders, and it's going to be a fun year next year. We'll get ready for it.
All right, and real quickly before we wrap this up, we also have to wrap up our picks here. David, how do you believe you did?
You know what? Like we talked about, we said that we were kind of in the rising still. We have a lot of teams in the rise, and I'm one of those teams. I'm one of those teams that's in the rise still. I don't think it ended well for me, but we'll see what happens. I don't know what the final score was.
All right, so the final score was David 65-27, and I went 69-23.
So that's a loss. Like we said, we set our aims high, but we're gonna do some rebuilding in the off season. We're gonna come back better next year.
All right, and with that, we will see you guys for Friday Night Spotlight next year. However, be sure to continue tuning in to Pinal Central for all of our local sports coverage and our winter sports coverage as we transition over to Pinal Prep Spotlight.